Hi there. This is my initial reaction video to the Dune 2020 movie's first trailer, which was posted online today, September 9th. Now, I say my reaction because I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself well-read because I've read the books twice, once in high school and another time in college, but that was over 15 years ago. Though, when I read a book, I don't skim it. That isn't reading it. And when I read a book, I don't read a dozen a year. I read one or two very slowly, one page at a time, reading the print off of it. Just heavy analysis, slowly and focused. That's just how I operate. Thus, my YouTube channel is purely a Game of Thrones analysis channel, and for the A Song of Ice and Fire book series in general. I just can't juggle that many different franchises. That what I can focus on and try to be an expert on is A Song of Ice and Fire. Who is an expert? I'll tell you right now, I'll point you to Quinn Howard of the YouTube channel Quinn's Ideas, formerly Quinn's Ideas of Ice and Fire. That I've met him over Twitter, we've talked about various things a few times, that when he was doing Game of Thrones analysis, I've been doing Game of Thrones analysis occasionally. You go, here's something stupid the writers did. Quinn is a polymath. His channel does in-depth reviews of Game of Thrones stuff, of Dune, Hyperion, Lovecraft, Asimov's Foundation series. I don't know how someone can be that much of an expert on so many things as we have seen in his videos where he knows a lot about everything. I can't do that. I can only focus on one thing at a time. So if you want what I consider the definitive fan reaction to this, look to him. For the definitive fan assessment of it, an analysis breakdown, and was this good, was this bad, look to that. This is just my reaction as a guy who read the books very thoroughly years ago, but understands concepts from it. That I was so surprised leading up to this. In the past year, we've seen, as they've been working on this movie, just how few major sci-fi news sites, their reporters didn't seem familiar with Dune at all. You could tell they hadn't read it, that they were Googling the names and reading them off Wikipedia without comprehension. So enough people in my comments sections and on Twitter said, hey, can we hear your reaction? My subscribers wanted to hear, well, what do you think about Dune? Just, okay, me as a private citizen, not a Dune expert, what did I think of the new Dune movie and what they're doing? And I'm going to be talking about this more in the coming weeks every time there's another video coming out because I'm a huge fan. I just don't consider myself on that level of a literary expert. And I've watched the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, which I consider the best adaptation up to now. You can see them Googling images from the 1984 Lynch movie, which is awful, and like the M. Night Shyamalan's Airbender attempt at this, purely because you can't fit this story in 4 hours or 3 hours. It needs to be a miniseries or 2 movies, that this book is too big to fit into a single movie. It was foolish to even try in 1984. But that's all in the past, I guess. So these are just my reactions and my assessment as a reasonably well-read private citizen. I'm not someone who runs a Dune channel. I'm not an expert the way Quinn Howard is. I read the books before the first miniseries in 2000. I read them in the late 90s is when I started reading them. So I'm reasonably familiar with all this, and I'm not jumping on the bandwagon because I saw the first trailer. I've been a Dune fan for years. I even read the first couple of sets of the spin-off expanded universe novels through the Butlerian Jihad ones. Then I was in grad school. I was too busy to read the most recent ones. But like some of the other prequel era stuff, and I actually reasonably enjoyed them as like an expanded universe thing, but that was a while ago. So I'm reasonably well-read. There are real experts out there, and these are just my views on it. Also, this video is going to be my reactions to specifically the first trailer. I missed out on the opportunity to pick apart the first cast photos we got of them in costume. Quinn already did better videos on that, Everyone looks amazing. I love the comparisons that the director himself has been making to, yeah, Paul Atreides is sort of like Michael Corleone, or it's this tragic story of his fall from grace and stuff and into power. And that's a really good analogy. Not a perfect analogy, but people go, oh, this is this great roaring adventure thing. No. It's a really complex story. It's a tragedy in some ways. Paul is burdened with terrible purpose, and he's got the weight of the world on him, and brooding and thinking about the future. And Quinn summarized all this so much better that they nailed it. That Chalamet is what you mentally picture Paul Atreides looking like. I mean, he's a teenager. I don't blame the miniseries for this, because it's, an open issue of how do you handle something that adapts a story across decades. That in the miniseries, Alec Newman was mind-blowingly good as older Paul. By, like, Children of Dune. He is amazing. I've cried watching scenes of him in Children of Dune. But they had him starting out, Dawson casting. He plays 15-year-old Paul in the part 1 of the miniseries when he's a decade older than that. And as the story progresses, he ages into it more naturally. And, it's a question, it's a story covering decades. How do you do that? If you're doing adaptations of Shakespeare's multiple historical plays about Henry V, starting as young Prince Hal and ending with Henry V, do you cast a young actor? Do you have an older actor pretending to be a teenager? These are the reasonable questions. So I'm still very fond of the miniseries, just as Quinn is. That it's good in the miniseries, but Newman really knocked it out of the park in the sequel miniseries. This is what you think of Paul Atreides looking like Chalamet in part 1. Should we be so lucky as for them to adapt Children of Dune in sequel movies, we'll see how they handle that, but it would take so long to make them. He'd probably be 30 by then anyway. So I don't know. In terms of cast appearances, the only things that I thought were particularly good, Zendaya is great. And another thing, through the Spider-Man movies, I thought her name was Zendaya, because I've heard people saying it that way on TV, and they were wrong, and I looked up, it's pronounced Zendaya, so sorry about that. And on pronunciation, we ran into this with the Song of Ice and Fire, that everyone has their own individual, iconic way of saying what the characters' names are, and then you realize that's not how it's pronounced. Like, I always say Chaney when it's really Chani, so forgive me if I slip into that. And you're usually able to get this pretty well. The one I'm really annoyed about is Duke Leto. That the Lynch movie said Leto. The miniseries said Leto. Frank Herbert, in audio recordings, said Leto. But this movie is apparently going with Leto, that we heard in these behind-the-scenes videos. And it's just, here we go again. With how do you pronounce it? It is a real-life name. It's not like a space name like Chani or something. So people have their own way of pronouncing it in different languages, I guess. Maybe like in Spanish it's pronounced differently because it's from Greek mythology. I'm not sure. And I'm going to spend all 30 seconds talking about that they made a slight change with Liet Kynes. That they gender swapped it to be a woman, and I don't care. My views are exactly the same as what Quinn said, that Kynes is first and foremost defined as being a scientist and a climatologist, and that, in that sense, Liet's gender is really irrelevant. It defined as a scientist, and it is, because, long story short, this is a world where only women have psychic powers. There are certain roles where, like, you can't easily gender swap Lady Jessica, because only women can be Bene Gesserit. But with him, it doesn't really matter as much with Liet Kynes. It isn't the most important character in terms of the ongoing story, compared to like a Gurney Halleck scale character, where that might be a little odd, but it's not even the biggest character. And also the fact that it's race swapping. I don't even consider it race swapping. That whole other video I could have made on this, that race in Dune, that they're 20,000 years in the future, and through human migration and stuff, the human phenotype has been mixed up so much through intermingling that no one looks exactly like what contemporary races are like. I mean, they mention at one point that the Atreides sort of look like bits of Slavic and bits of Afghan. There's a stray mention in the books that they're not really any one modern ethnicity. So it's irrelevant that she's a black woman. So why bring that up? The fact that it's a woman really isn't an impact. And if this is the biggest casting swap they make like that, I won't complain. If they do something silly like, let's make the emperor a woman, it's why are you making these changes so much? That doesn't really, and there's plot reasons why that doesn't make sense, because it's a plot point that his wife was a Bene Gesserit and they're manipulating him. And only Bene Gesserit can only be women, so I could go on. Point is, other channels already dealt with the casting stuff and going over all the interviews. I'm not going to touch that. All of this introduction out of the way, my thoughts on what we saw in the first trailer.